Let's make this happen. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. This is event something like 26. We've lost count. There have been so many events this year, but this is 6 ways to refresh your workplace in 2023 with Louis Alloro. Yeah, I can say it. I wanted it to be fancier, but it's just Alloro of the Wellbeing Lab and Hone. Hone is a virtual coaching company, very interesting organization, as is the Wellbeing Lab, which Louis will tell you about as well. But you're in for a real treat. Why? Because I'm such a good biography reader. Ladies and gentlemen, Louis Alloro is not as hard to say. Alloro is a social entrepreneur creating and facilitating evidence-based learning experiences, helping teams dig deeper and reach higher. He was one of the first 100 people in the world to earn a master's in applied positive psychology from the University of Pennsylvania. And since 2008, he's traveled and trained and certified thousands of practitioners and workplaces in applied positive psychology and well-being science. His passion is helping corporations, cities, and campuses build well-being coalitions that build a particular leadership to align and integrate collective actions that transform conversations and behaviors at scale. He's a co-creator at the Wellbeing Lab and the Change Lab, a senior fellow at the Center for the Advancement of Wellbeing at George Mason University, and a doctoral student at Antioch University, where he studies systems-informed positive psychology interventions that create well-being and change in equitable and innovative ways. Ladies and gentlemen, you are in for a treat today. If you are crabby, you should end this session with a smile and improved well-being. Louis is also, and we checked in with him at the beginning. He said he's a 4 out of 5, so we should take him to a 5. I'm going to let you take over the screen.
All right. Who's Mimi?
Oh, Mimi was somebody else. Don't talk about her. It was a different presentation. Oh, I got caught with my slides unhinged.
Thank you for the welcome here. Greetings, everyone. Thanks for coming. I was just saying to Brad in the chat that it's that time of year where everything feels optional, isn't it? That time where, you know, should I stay or should I go kinds of things. Thank you for staying. Thank you for coming to 6 positive ways to refresh your workplace for 2023. I'm Louis Alloro. And I'm here, I represent the Wellbeing Lab, a global organization that is out for changing conversations and changing behaviors in workplaces of all sorts and all kinds. I'm also representing Hone, a leader development company, an online virtual leader development company that offers a Netflix-style live virtual training and coaching sessions for managers and leaders in all sorts of workplaces. Check that out if you're looking for a scalable solution for your workplace, honehq.com. Our philosophy at the Wellbeing Lab is to help people learn how to lead well-being. I'm going to talk to you today through these different components of a well-being literacy, the importance of an evaluation mechanism, how activation happens in different ways for different people, not one size fits all, and certainly then the determination to see things through behavioral change as a process, which all of you irrational people very much know. The type of leadership here that I'm talking about is not just positional leadership. What's important to me is something that we call social and emotional leadership, the type of leadership that is about influence, less about position. We can all be social, emotional leaders, and I know we are in many ways. So let's just start with a brief check-in here at the top of the session. To do the check-in, I'd like for you to be introduced to our learning loop, a feedback mechanism that asks us to not just keep going and doing and trying different things, but pausing to really reflect and assess those actions before proceeding and adjusting them for the new way forward. So this is a feedback mechanism, or I like to say a feed forward mechanism, that really asks us human beings to stop the action, to pause for reflection. So let me just ask you, in the spirit of assessment, what's been working well for you in keeping your workplace fresh? We're talking about refreshing for 2023. But let me ask you, what's been working well for you to keep things fresh this year in 2022? We'll do these two questions under assessment. First, what's been going well for you this past year when it comes to refreshing or keeping your workplace fresh? We could use the chat box for this, and we're a small enough group that some people can unmute themselves as well. Ryan, explain yourself.
Oh, I was just being silly. I was just saying, soap keeps things fresh.
Ah, you mean like real soap? I thought you meant.
I was being
soap.
literal. Yeah, no, I was being literal to get the conversation started. That's my job. I'm like silly string for public events.
Well, there are crickets happening in the chat, so I'm wondering, is nothing working well? I don't believe that to be true. Sam says I tried going to a co-working space for a month this year and really enjoyed. Yeah, so for those of us working home alone, being around other people, we are social creatures after all, so that would make sense that might help us keep things fresh. Emily, similar coffee shops. And using Notion, I'm new on Notion too. I'm just getting to know that as well. What do you like about Notion for keeping things fresh, Emily? Can you unmute yourself?
Yeah, for sure. It's just an easy way to keep my life organized. I was writing everything down in a physical planner before, and now it feels like it's just easier to organize and make things look neat. So that's helped me have some clarity.
Yeah, it definitely helps lessen some of the overwhelm without that organization. I love the idea that overwhelm is just being out of communication with our commitments. And so I think Notion helps us keep our commitments aligned and ahead on there. So thank you, Emily. Laura says getting into behavioral economics and finance, new learnings, right? That getting better at something, learning something, growth, one of our core brain needs as human beings, mastery and pursuing the getting better at things. So there are things that are working, right? What isn't working? Where's the struggle? Let's talk about that for a minute. So when it comes to keeping your workplace and your work fresh, where are you struggling? This is the second part of our learning loop assessment. We should ask Brad to answer this question in Italian to really up the ante here. Grazie. Where are you struggling when it comes to keeping your work and workplace fresh? Laura, what do you mean stakeholders? Can you talk to us about that?
They're just exhausting. Yeah, I think that's the piece. It feels like it's constant churn. So I don't know.
New and different stakeholders. Is that what you're saying?
No, there are opinions and ideas and thoughts. It's constant churn. We don't have really like a North Star that we're going towards.
Okay. Yeah. So that could be a real struggle, right? Not knowing the North Star, not having clarity around the vision. And positive psychology, my field, we talk a lot about the science of imagination and how important our brains are for prospecting the future. So one of the things that separates us humans from other animals is the ability to see something before it actually exists and to call it into existence. Something really valuable to play with, because worry, something we can do in our brains, is just a misuse of our imagination. So like you say, what is that North Star? What's the optimal future? Where are we wanting to head? Emily talks about structuring the day so she's productive and efficient. That could be a struggle, how to structure, what's the optimal way to structure a day. Sam talks about creating focused time blocks, right? So for deep kinds of thinking and deep kinds of learning, right? If we're constantly task switching, one of the struggles is for our brain to have enough power to keep going. There's much lost cost in task switching. And so how do we create that focused time blocks? Okay, so There are certain things that are working well. Let's start there. There are some things that are really part of our struggle. Let's not ignore the struggle. The struggle is real. Today, I want to talk to you about ways that you can refresh your workplace using this approach that we use at the Wellbeing Lab. I'm going to start with literacy, how important it is to have shared language around well-being. Well-being, we define as the ability to feel good, struggle well, and function effectively, despite whatever circumstances you're up against in your life and your work. It's a fairly simple definition because well-being, different than wellness is often associated with fitness and flu shots and fruit bowls, more of the physical aspects. Well-being is a much broader catch-all, more integrated. It's the reason why we spell it without a hyphen even. We've gone back and forth on that several times. Well, how should we spell well-being? Well, if we're really talking about something that's more integral, an integrated way of being in the world, being well, then let's have the word be that as well, one word without the hyphen. This ability to feel good, to struggle well is how we think about resilience even. Resilience has the ability to struggle well, not taking away the discomfort or the struggle, but learning to cope and navigate it in a more empowered way. And that's where the positive psychology piece comes in. Here are some of the components of well-being that we purport here at the Wellbeing Lab. That tiny is mighty. We do a lot of teaching around the tiny habits model and how scaling things down to the next step for you and wrapping that with an anchor that already exists and a reward that feels like a real celebration in your body can be a really good strategy for creating change. Well-being is multidimensional, and I'll talk more about this in a little bit, that it's not just about me, but it's also about we, this kind of relational level of well-being that we can find in our lives, relational on our teams, relational in our families and on our home partnerships and friendships. So on small groups kind of levels. And then on this us level, something more at scale that takes into account more of the systemic and structural pieces, the process pieces of our organizing life and how we can fine tune some of those things for our well-being as well. We are really good to say that well-being is not once and done, right? It's something that over time ebbs and flows. So you wouldn't have a constant increase of your well-being, because if you never felt bad, you would not know what feeling good felt like anymore. You need to have the contrast and the comparison in order for one to, you really need to know the other. I was thinking about this over the past 24 hours with the sudden death of Twitch, and how that, someone so full of light is also so full of darkness, right? That it's both. Life is that kind of both and so is well-being. Having a literacy around well-being, a common language, can help us in conversations that are more aspirational, intentional, future-minded, prospective, as I was talking about just a moment ago. We say conversations are where change happens. Change happens from conversation to conversation. So how can we become more effective conversationalists, asking the right questions, right, with the right inquiry? Next is evaluation, right? So we have a common language. We could then have a mechanism for evaluation. As you know, what we measure, we manage. So let me ask you, if you were to measure your well-being based on the dimensions I have on the screen now, taking all things together over the last month, how have you been feeling? And you could pop your response into the chat box if you'd like, right? Have you been really struggling? Have you been feeling on top of the world? Everything is great. Have you been feeling not terrible, just getting by? Or are you living well despite some struggles? Thank you for your honesty there, Danielle, right? That well-being is not without struggle. This is a really important part of thinking about this kind of work, right? It's not about, like I said a moment ago, feeling good all the time. It's about learning how to navigate your life so that you can move from not feeling bad, just getting by, to perhaps living well despite some struggle, from that darker blue in the right, lower right quadrant to the lighter blue in the upper left quadrant, where you could have high struggle in your life. The struggle is real. If the pandemic taught us anything within the past 2 years, it's that the efficiencies that we've set up over the past couple of decades were in turmoil once something like the pandemic hit, right? The struggle is real. You can learn to live well despite this struggle, having the tools and strategies, skills and strengths to learn how to cope with the inevitable ups and downs of life. You'll notice that there is a portion of the population that is consistently thriving, but that always depends too, right? Because who knows what'll happen tomorrow that might knock you off from that perception of your life. When it comes to evaluation, we talk about Martin Seligman's PERMA theory, which I'm going to go into in detail in just a moment. But these factors are kind of like, picture the dashboard of an airplane, for example, and the pilots sitting behind that dashboard that have multiple indicators of how well that plane is flying, right? Not just one indicator, but several indicators. This theory was born from my teacher, Martin Seligman, at the University of Pennsylvania, one of the most influential living psychologists in the world today. He just turned 80 this year. I was at his birthday party a couple of weeks ago. Marty talks about learned helplessness was the beginning of his work in the 1970s and 80s, to learned optimism, his work in the 1990s. And then as the president of the American Psychological Association, introducing and giving a call to action really for a more positive psychology. Not that there's a negative psychology, of course, there's a traditional psychology. Traditional psychologists tend to focus on what's wrong with people, identifying deficits, weaknesses. And in fact, the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, a book this thick, was once, just a decade ago this thick, 2 decades ago this thick. It constantly is growing. So Marty said to his colleagues around 2000, we're half-baked. We focus so much on what's wrong with people and not enough on what's right. Is it no wonder that so many people today are depressed, anxious, and attention deficit disordered, etc., because we have such a taxonomy for it. So let's have a as robust taxonomy for a more positive psychology, because just because you take away someone's depression, for example, doesn't leave a happy person. So what fills that bucket? You could think of these 6 factors as ways to fill that bucket. You can think about your life over the past 2 weeks and how often you have felt positive, how often you have felt interested and deeply engaged, how often you have felt respected and appreciated in your relationships, how often you have felt that your life was valuable, worthwhile, like you were having a positive impact on others and making progress towards your goals, and feeling physically strong and healthy when it comes to your physical health. So your subjective assessment, your assessment of your quality of life is something that you're doing all of the time. We have a good assessment tool that you can use. It's a free survey at permasurvey.com, perma with an H. You're not just taking the survey, but what you get is a really nice customized report at the end that allows you to then set up an action plan and dip into our evidence-based toolbox, which has hundreds of interventions in there for you to choose from. We do offer subscriptions to this survey tool that you can have for your company or organization, and then have a private dashboard that shows you disidentified data on the back end, how your groups and teams are doing within your organization. Great way to start conversations and lead to that kind of behavioral change that I know you all are interested in. Next, we have activation. And again, I'm going to bring up this PERMA model. I want to go through each of these factors and give you a little bit of the science and some of the interventions to think about, right? So as you think about refreshing your workplace, in 2023, you might think of these factors as levers, some of the things that you might pull. personally, relationally, maybe even structurally to help refresh the workplace. So let's go through each of them. Positive emotion, the first one. This is not to say, as I said earlier, this is not to say that life isn't about a full range of human emotion, because it is. You need to have sad days in order to know what those happy days feel like. You need to have anger. You need to have guilt. All of these are really important and have adaptive advantages for our human well-being and survival. Positive emotion is different than negative emotion. Barb Fredrickson, the leading researcher in positive emotion, has put on the map this idea that unlike negative emotion that narrows and focuses us to fight, flee, or freeze, positive emotion broadens our ability to see things more panoramically. And in some really cool laboratory studies with some eye tracking software, she's able to show that people who are primed with positive emotion and people who are shown puppies jumping on the screen like you see here, for example, in that eye tracking software, broaden their field of vision in a statistically significant way. So you can think of positive emotion as the ability to see things more panoramically. You actually have your field of vision increases as your positive emotion increases. And the second part of her theory is that positive emotion not just broadens our ability to see things panoramically, but it builds a set of resources in our life, social resources, psychological resources like creativity, the ability to solve problems faster and more creatively, physical resources even like immune function. There's some great studies that prime people with positive emotion and then put influenza up their nose, and people who are higher in positive emotion to start bounce back faster from the influenza. Of course, they pay people for these studies, otherwise who would do it? But yes, positive emotion does increase our immune function. So it's not that it just feels good to feel good, but feeling good leads to another set of outcomes that we're all interested in our lives in terms of receptivity, creativity, and even connectivity. One way that you might think about increasing your positive emotion is just simply to prioritize a jolt of joy to start your day. So what might you do? Pull for a favorite song, watch some comedic jokes, call a friend who helps you feel good on your way to work, right? So prioritizing positivity and positive emotion, just so that you can accrue some more positive emotion into your psychological bank account as a way to ensure that you have the energy to play. One way that you might do this on your team and your work is to bring in a question like I started the session with today. What went well? What's been going well here on our project meeting, that we're here to talk about? What's been going well with this client, right? A positively primed question like that can be a way to prioritize positive emotion. Of course, this time of year, all sorts of celebrations happening at year end. Celebration is really the highest vibration that you could experience in your body in terms of positive emotion, authentic celebration. So Brene Brown says you could measure the well-being of a family by how many random dance parties break out in the middle of the kitchen. So I encourage you to have a random dance party this holiday season. Next, we'll talk about engagement. Engagement is the ability to do what you do best every day, to show up to your life and your work using your strengths. Those things that not just you're good at, but you and enjoy doing, but the things that really light you up. What are your top strengths? Do you have a language to describe your strengths? We have all sorts of assessments that we can use to help identify strengths. But the next time you look in the mirror, be curious, where does your eye go to? I was telling Ryan before we started, I burned myself the other day on my face. So of course, every time I look in the mirror now, I'm looking at this blemish on my face. Another example is, when you have a toothache, right, that your tongue goes to the tooth, that's challenged, the weakness. But how often are you running your tongue around your mouth when there's no toothache, thanking it for its strength, right? So where does your attention go? Strengths are those things that we can build a muscle around, literally a psychological muscle, just like going to the gym and working on your physical muscle. One way that you might build engagement or a deeper sense of engagement personally is to turn a morning to-do on your list into a ta-da, by aligning one of your strengths to the task. So you might align, for example, your strength of humor and playfulness to a task that you've been procrastinating around. How might you incorporate some more humor and playfulness with that task in order to up your energy around this? I do a lot of team building in my work, and we do a building of a team strength profile using a really nice color-coded Excel spreadsheet, essentially, that shows what the team strengths are, who shares what strengths, where's there deficits in strengths that we might hire for or shore up in other ways by building out from where we are already good and strong. That's the idea with strengths. What if you start with what's already good and strong? Sometimes those weaknesses do self-correct themselves. The third of those perma pillars is our relationships. We are social creatures, and relationships are everything. What if people are doing the best they can with what they have right now? No one wakes up in the morning deciding to be the most curmudgeon and difficult person that they can be, right? So everyone's fighting something that we know nothing about. What if we had more grace for people and believing that they're doing the best they can with what they have right now? One of the best studies that I love comes from Harvard University, the Harvard study of adult development, one of the longest longitudinal studies of adult development, that shows that greater than cholesterol as a predictor of one's longevity of life is asking someone at age 50, what are about the quality of their relationships? And people who report having higher quality connections at age 50 live longer, have higher satisfaction with their lives. Relationships are everything, kind of in that spirit of Ubuntu and Namaste, right? For me to exist, you must exist too. We need each other that way. So one way that you might think about improving your relationships is to be more curious than judgmental. We're so good at being judgy of each other. We're doing social comparison all the time. But if you could replace your judgment with curiosity, asking a question, in fact, on teams even, one of the benchmarks of well-being on a team is to count the number of questions that get asked in the meeting versus the number of statements that get made. And you can see, are we being more curious than we are? Inquiry over advocacy is essentially the idea here. Let's be more curious with each other. Tell me more about that. I'm curious about that, How did you come to that decision? Or how did you get to this place? Let's ask each other better questions. The next factor on that dashboard of the well-being plane is meaning and purpose. The single best predictor of meaningfulness is the belief that our jobs have positive impact on others, right? So impact of our work. I love the idea that chefs in a kitchen, when you go to restaurants where you can see into the kitchen, the glass wall between the restaurant and the kitchen, chefs that can see the patrons, the people who are enjoying their food, are way more engaged and find more meaning in their work because they're connected to the end user. So how can you do this? You can get connected to the end user, right? You can get connected to your end users. I know at Etsy, everyone at the company spends time on the customer service lines in the company every year, right? So maybe you incorporate that into your workplace. How can you connect directly with the people whose impact it is that your work has? Another way that you could find more meaning in your life is to think about doing a 5-minute favor. This idea comes from Adam Grant over at Wharton, who wrote the book Give and Take, right? So a 5-minute favor, something that isn't so hard on you, but could have a positive impact on someone else. Leaving someone a LinkedIn recommendation that hasn't asked for it, making a really nice introduction between two people who you think might get along, or even buying someone a cup of coffee, even someone you don't know, on the line behind you, as you're waiting in line to get your own coffee, right? Something that's not so much time or energy intensive on your part, but can have a huge impact on someone else. Finally, achievement and accomplishment, this next pillar of the PERMA model, is this idea of having goals that matter to us, goals that are authentic to us, that are stretch enough, but not too much of a stretch, things that can put us into flow, this idea of optimal engagement, kind of being one with the music, where our skill and our challenge level are kind of aptly met. Professor Carol Dweck talks about believing in our abilities. Even more important is the belief that we can improve our abilities. And she's known for her work in mindset. Some of you might be familiar with this approach of fixed versus growth mindset. The idea here, friends, is that we all have fixed mindsets in some parts of our life, and we have growth mindsets in other parts of our life. So where in your life might you have a fixed mindset, where you are in more of a desire to be impressive, where you maybe not think of yourself as good enough, where you're not as open to feedback in maybe some of these areas, where failure really feels fatal and not as an opportunity for learning as it does with a growth mindset. So where might you have this? Do you have this? Are you not so much a creative person? Are you not so much a numbers guy or gal? Where in your life might you have this? Are you not so athletic in your belief system about yourself? Well, the truth is we're not born athletic. We're not born creative. We're not born as having finance understanding. This is something that we grow into. And this very foundational idea of growth mindset as the opportunity to have a belief about how we learn in the world and how we grow in the world with effort and with intention and with support systems that provide feedback and feed forward for us to learn and grow with. And this idea of growth mindset is something that we can learn and develop, also with a growth mindset. Very meta there for you. So what I would suggest in terms of building your sense of accomplishment, try something new. When was the last time you tried something new in your life? I just became a dad this past year, that's new. That's for sure something new, something I haven't done before. Lots of learning there. It doesn't have to be something as grand, Go take that knitting class or go to the cha-cha dance class or something where you can incorporate the power of yet, that I'm just not there yet. It's a very small word, Carol Dweck says, with a very big impact. So what are you learning? What's the team learning, at your workplace? What's the shared learning that you can do together in 2023 that might refresh your workplace?
Louis, I just have to interrupt to say, I love the idea of, I had a kid to try something new. I think like trying a different donut or a different colored apple would be a better starting place, maybe. Just say.
Oh, I didn't start there, my friend. This has been a journey. I've been learning and teaching positive psych now for about 15 years. And so little things like learning how to play the piano, I guess that's not a very little thing, but doing something new, something that you haven't done in a long time or something that you can do for the first time. One way that you could do that even, Ryan, is to circulate the spices in your spice cabinet. Something really simple is take the spices in the back of the cabinet that you don't use that much, put them in the front of the cabinet, and this idea of circulation can help you try something new.
Yeah, so I thought right away, I was like, when you said circulate, I was like, oh, do you want me to shake them out in my family room and see who sneezes? Like, I'm so glad you finished the thought. It's just my brain.
Yeah, circulation. And you just moved, right? So I bet that your
Yeah.
spaces are nicely organized for now. But so maybe in March you can circulate your spice cabinet.
I'll put it in my to-do list.
This last pillar on health is more of kind of like the neck down interventions, we call them, the things that put you somatically in your body. A lot of this has to do with some very foundational ideas of eating and moving and sleeping, and the small choices around what you eat and when, how you move and when. This is not just about exercise. This could be about any type of physical activity, and how you sleep and when, and are you getting enough rest and recovery? There's been some research in the past couple of years that shows we need around 40% of our days to be spent in rest and recovery for optimal functioning. So I'm not going to ask you all in the room what percentage of your day is spent in rest and recovery, but the most successful people, the happiest people, are the ones that aren't always going and doing, but they're pausing and they're just being, they're resting, they're letting their bodies do that. These things matter more than we know or think. So prioritizing nutrient-dense foods and making sure that you're getting those green leafy vegetables and fruits and things that we know are better for us and our cell regeneration than choosing the donut. Not that you never choose the donut, right? And if you are going to choose the donut, make sure you damn well enjoy it. The worst thing you could do is do what my mom does, is kind of eat the donut, but regrets it and is not really fully enjoying it. And that, in that sense, the donut has her, right? She doesn't have the donut. There's not enough freedom around that. And we can get in our own way there. Remember the fidget factor, right? The fidget factor is choose the steps at the airport when you can choose the steps or the escalator, right? Use the fidget factor when you can to just know that small amounts of gains in your physical activity add up, right? The aggregate of 1% gains, all of those small choices matter. Where you can walk, take a walk, or ride your bike to work on some days where you can. Get moving, get your family in that kitchen for a dance party. All of those things help you with your physical activity. And maximize your sleep hygiene, right? By that, I mean, what are your rituals around bedtime? Are they working for you? With my son, we have a bath time and a story time and a ritual around his bed procedure that lets him know, and his body know, and his brain for that matter, that it's time to transition to sleep. Us humans, we need the same thing. So get your cell phones out of your face, put on some music. Maybe it's time for a meditation or a book, something to read, something for you to optimize and maximize your sleep hygiene. So those are the PERMA pillars. That was a quick tour of the PERMA pillars. Again, you can measure your PERMA well-being at this website, permasurvey.com. In terms of the strategies, there's no one magic strategy that will help every person become well. When I got into this field 15 years ago, we were incorporating behavioral economics and behavioral science and all sorts of different approaches to well-being and happiness. And I remember I've seen a switch in these 15 years from trying to reduce everything down to the most basic elemental, what works for everyone, and a shift towards a more broad perspective that what works for me may not work for you. And what works for Emily may not work for Laura. And what works for Laura today may not work for Laura tomorrow. Right. So it's a good idea to be flexible and agile and playful as you think about these things. Here are some other ways, other strategies. I've talked about some of them, but not all of them. So maybe some on here might spark you in terms of how you might increase your relationships, for example, or your health. So you could take a look at what's on the screen now and see if anything sparks you. Maybe it's getting outside in nature, or maybe it's using that learning loop, those questions. What worked well for me today? Where did I struggle? What will I try differently tomorrow? The last part of our lead model in terms of leading well-being and having a refreshed workplace in 2023 is determination. Determination is the ability to stick with it and to stay the course. Behavior change takes time, as we all know. And it's not just about what I do, it's about what we do and how we be together in a very interpersonal way. This has to do with the rituals of our teams and the routines and the processes. I really encourage you to think like a 5-year-old some days, maybe once a quarter or twice a year, and question those routines, rituals, and processes like a 5-year-old would. Why do we do it this way? Why do we do it that way? Why? And how's that working for us as Dr. Phil would say? Sorry, Brad, I got distracted with that cat on your head there. And this third level is the us level, more systemic or structural as you think about well-being across your organization. And these are ways that you as leaders can think about how we structure the work, how we structure the day, how we structure even the onboarding, the offboarding, all of the things that we do across an entire organization to ensure that systemically we're attending to well-being in these ways. Dr. Peggy Kern, one of our main collaborators, talks about well-being habits and attitudes and actions as things that spread through a complex web of social interactions. And so we're all influenced by each other, of course. And so again, in terms of our social connections and interactions, we do need each other. Here are some of the things that you could do now for your team to increase some of these PERMA factors. You can do a strengths check-in, for example, to improve engagement on the team. What lit you up this past week might be a question you ask at a team meeting. You could have virtual coffee dates, right, where people are checking in with each other. There's some great tools on Slack integrations even that compare people in big companies with others they may not know, similar to how those random collisions may have happened at the elevator or the water cooler when we were not as virtual as we are today. I've mentioned connecting to your end users as one way to create more meaning. But how about passion fatigue? How about avoiding this idea of passion fatigue, where sometimes, we have this sense that more and better and faster and stronger, and this idea that exhaustion is a status symbol. So let's avoid that as we can and encourage each other to set and honor boundaries for rest and recovery, something that we know is very important. You might move together. How about a walking meeting when you can, even if you're not in the same place, right? Maybe you both take your cell phones and have a walk and talk around your own neighborhoods, as opposed to needing to sit in front of the computer. And so these are just some ideas for how you might refresh now on a we level some of these PERMA factors in the new year. Certainly, this is not an exhaustive list. And if you are interested, we have endless evidence-based strategies here at the Wellbeing Lab that can help you find the right ones for your team. In terms of this group level and the phenomenon, this interpersonal phenomenon, psychological safety is an important factor, right? The feeling that we have of confidence when we trust others for not shaming or blaming or rejecting us if we're coming with failures or struggles. Psychological safety has been shown by Google as the #1 predictor of their most successful teams. And so psychological safety, physical safety and the importance of that, psychological safety, similarly, very foundational for us all. When it's low, it looks like this. People don't know each other personally because there's all just kind of jumping right into the work here. And so make sure you have check-ins at your meeting, make sure you're asking people how they are, really bring some prompts. One of the prompts our team likes is something you might not know about me is ... We play that game sometime to get to know each other. Making sure people are asking questions, owning up to their mistakes, not blaming each other, not avoiding difficult conversations and hot button topics, but hitting them head on. Not just offering differing points of view or not offering any differing points of view, not dominating in team discussions, not requesting feedback and feed forward. Really, all systems rely on feedback for optimal functioning. Don't venture outside of norms to support each other. And don't ask one another for help when they need it. We need each other. So in terms of this determination, this is our approach at the Wellbeing Lab. We want to enhance resilience and recovery so that people can struggle well with what has happened or is happening. We want to enable connection and collaboration, and we want to educate people on well-being, what it is, and how it can be increased. This level of determination will ensure our success. A lot of times we use Dr. David Cooperrider's appreciative inquiry, which is premised on this idea that every action we take is preceded by a question. And this model of defining a generative topic, discovering the best of the past, dreaming the future, using that imagination and prospection to then design around that dream. How might we do this? And what will we do going forward? This appreciative inquiry model is really scalable. You could use it one-on-one on a coaching conversation, small groups, entire multinational global institutions, thousands of people in the room using this topic. Let me know in the chat if you've ever used this approach in your design initiatives. I'm curious if this irrational group has used the appreciative inquiry approach that uses this idea of generative questions, helping us see old things in new ways. Love this idea of generativity. What wants to happen next in 2023? Generative questions can help us see these old things in newer ways. So that at our learning organizations, as we learn to learn together, how to learn together, we do that. We act, we assess on those actions, we adjust those actions. And this learning loop can be applied in all sorts of scenarios. And what I'd love us to do in the last few minutes is just to apply it here. What will you do next? What will you try next as you think about refreshing your work and your workplace in 2023? So what is one thing you will take away from our time together today to refresh your work and workplace in 2023? And let's have a peak end, something we know very important in behavioral economics and behavioral science, as a way to move in the direction of what we most deeply, rigorously, and persistently ask questions about. So that's my question for you is, what will you do next? Marjorie, is that Marjorie who I think it is? Take walking meetings. Is that Marjorie Perez or a different Marjorie? Hi, Marjorie. I knew it. What might you try next? Sonia, thank you. Create a space to talk about, celebrate, and learn from failures. Yeah, have a failure Friday every once in a while, where everyone brings what didn't work, and we celebrate that. Laura talks about getting to personally know my new teammates. Yeah, make the relational as important as the rational, or even more important than the rational. The work, the to-dos, the KPIs, the OKRs, all of that rational stuff we have to get to. Make the relational piece as important or more important than that. Emily says, agreed, walking meetings, schedule time with my coworkers for personal connection. Thank you. 5-minute colleague service moments. What do you mean, Sam? Oh,
there was a slide earlier where you said if you do little things that are good for others, it's similar to the feeling you get from working on something that really benefits others.
The 5-minute favor, I think you're talking about, yeah?
Yeah, so just doing something to get that little boost of goodwill is something I want to do.
Nice. Yeah, that's all it is, right? A little boost of goodwill. The thing about altruism is that the research shows that altruism is not just good for you and the person, the recipient, but also the onlooker. benefits. So when you hold the door for someone, for example, the person who observes that act of altruism and goodwill is also benefited and more likely to pay it forward, him or herself.
Cool.
Yeah, I think that's cool too. What kinds of questions do you have? We have 5 minutes. I'm happy to answer questions or hear some more of your commitments.
I know that I always say it wrong. It's no, I get it right sometimes. Titsania? No, Titsania. I got it right there. Titsania had a question. Maybe she's not here
Hey,
anymore.
hi,
Oh.
thank you for all your insight. So it is Tiziana, but close enough.
I was, oh, I got it right. Okay, anyways, go on, carry on.
That's okay. So I just have a quick question about, I'm obviously familiar with the perma theory from Seligman. So from 2011. So I was wondering how you went about to add the H at the end.
Yeah, through a lot of convincing. I was actually his student when the perma theory was coming to life. I can't tell you how many conversations we had about the importance of relationships and how relationships need to be included in that theory. And we went back and forth and back and forth and back and forth on that. This was in 2007, so a different world. Health came to be added. Sometimes we call it vitality in some models because you know, life isn't just about your psychology. It's also about the mind-body connection, the somatic connection between your mind and your body. I'm actually reading Gabor Mate's new book right now, The Myth of Normal. I really recommend it. He does a lot of talking about the science of the mind-body connection. And so Marty is convinciceable, you know, and so over time, you know, it was, you know, I was in the room too, and he said, okay, you all are right. You're all right. I missed that part of the model. So let's include it, the health piece.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
We had another question. Shay, go ahead. I think there was someone before you, but I saw you, Shay.
Oh, cool. Yeah, happy to ask. Thank you so much for your talk. It was super informative.
You're welcome.
Yeah, absolutely. My question was, how do you advise companies to experiment with more granular segmenting for employee benefits? So kind of like getting more specific on like different types of employees and what benefits might be helpful for them or barriers might exist for them that might not for others.
Yeah, well, I love the idea that employees are more committed to their affinity groups these days than they are even their entire company. So I think working with those employee resource groups, the affinity groups, normalizing that, bringing more of them to life. And I love the idea also in equity work that don't do anything about me without me. So we can include the people, the voices, and that's where I love the appreciative process too, the appreciative inquiry process, to facilitate conversations about what works well for people, what has worked well for people, discovering that, dreaming what could work better for us in the future, and then designing around that dream. In a beautiful appreciative inquiry process, a lot of self-organization can happen. Small group organization can happen where people take ownership of the things that are important to them to bring those things to life, right? Not waiting for others to do it, but bringing it to life ourselves. So I think that's a great way. I advise companies to really focus on those special interest groups that either have emerged, are emergent, right? What are the next ones on the horizon, and then work with them in particular.
Wow, that's really interesting. Thank you for your insights there.
Thanks for the question.
Yeah, so the thank you, Shay. Sorry, I was all excited to get to the other questions, but Majorie, Laura and Majorie. So either one, Laura, go first, pretty please.
Sure. Mostly, do any of those psychological safety signs of your team being low, does that vary at all by culture? We're a global company, so I think oftentimes we blame it's different cultures.
Yeah, of course, right? Nothing exists in a vacuum. I'm actually writing a paper about this now for my PhD about, you know, these global organizations, global teams, local cultures, you know, and kind of some of the the opportunities that exist in trying to align culture with optimal functioning for groups and teams. So yeah, it's not a simple answer, but you're right. I love the idea that everything always depends. And so yes, though that list is a good list to start with, and it depends on lots of other things like the nuances in different cultures and subcultures and subcultures, etc.
Makes sense.
That's obviously the hallmark of behavioral economics, right? Context matters. Context matters. There are no silver rules, if you will. So thank you, Laura, and then Marjorie.
Hi, Luis. This is Marjorie again.
Marjorie.
I'm Perez, a friend
How
of
are you,
mine, colleague.
Luis?
Yeah.
Since we are close to the end, we are over time. In your experience, what has been the most challenging piece of trying to refresh or implement well-being models in an organization? And the other question is, thinking about the last organization you worked for, you in the well-being matter, or you were consulting in the well-being matter, if you have to do it again, what would you do different?
And I know Marjorie is working to bring a greater well-being culture to her organization, and we've been talking about doing some of that together. So these are great questions. I think one of the biggest challenges sometimes, Marjorie, is the leadership that says, yeah, you can go do that with these people, but aren't involved in it themselves, aren't really walking the talk, right? So it's an espoused value, but it's not really a lived value. And that kind of discrepancy is a real challenge in getting this to have legs past any intervention that I would work as a consultant with an organization on, right? It might have some short-term outcomes, but if we want longer-term outcomes, cultural change, and behavioral change ultimately on those me level, we level, and us level, that kind of stuff takes time, and it takes people committed to walking that talk and not saying, here, do this with them, but let's do this together as a we. So I would say that is a challenge. Another challenge is or not challenge, but what would I do differently going forward based on a more recent project? Definitely, we need to incorporate anti-racist work into these positive interventions. We need to talk about power and privilege and things that in a project I worked on recently where we hadn't had that as top of mind as possible. We did get into some sticky situations as those self-organized groups start to emerge. People start to work with each other to develop well-being projects and interventions across silos and parts of the organization. What we see in the world is also happening in our companies, and we need to bring that to life in a more head-on, direct way, talking about anti-racism and some of the other systemic inequities that are preventing flourishing and optimal functioning. So I would be more inclined to be increasingly more intentional about that. That's a great question. Thank you.
Thank you.
And with that, that is the questions for today. I just wanted to double check. I did put the PERMA survey in the chat again, so please check that out. Also, if you're new to Irrational Labs, most of you are probably super fans, I get it. But that link is there in the chat, and then the Wellbeing Lab is in the chat. Louis, thank you so much for your time. And Louis also is putting his email in there, should you want to collaborate with him in the future. But lots of insights. This is an interesting time of year, but I liked how you said, well, it's the time where everything's optional, but it's also the time where like everything's wonderful and exhausting, right? Like you're looking forward to the holidays, but preparing for it's exhausting, you know? So I think it's a time with paradox, and it's a great time to reflect and think how we can refresh come Jan 1.
Yeah, maybe we need to do this session again in January, Ryan, where it's less January becomes less optional, you know, the reality sets in.
Right now we really have to refresh things. We can't just use soap, and it's not an accident. All right, everybody. Well, thank you so much for your time. I'm going to stop the recording.